Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on editing landscape images with Lightroom. So today's webinar is sponsored by our friends at X-Rite. Take a visit to xritephoto.com and you can see what they're up to. xritephoto.com is the place for X-Rite where everything dealing with photography lives. Once again, if you haven't joined me before, or if you have joined me before, I'm still Joe Brady. I'm your host today, the webinar marketing manager. I'm a photographer for many years. I own a studio with my wife Diane, and I lead landscape workshops around the country. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I'm just going to speak a couple of minutes. I know a couple of you joined me this morning, so you're going to have to listen through this again. I'm going to talk a little bit about monitor calibration and profiling because in any imaging program, it's really important that you get that under control first. We're going to spend our time today in the Lightroom 4 Develop module. That's where we're going to do all our edits. If you're a Lightroom 3 user and you haven't used 4 yet, there's going to be a couple of differences. It'll be kind of obvious what they are, but Lightroom 4 is definitely a worthwhile upgrade. So again, what we're after, again, remember your cameras capture color and tone different than your eyes see it. Here's a lovely scene. This is in the Grand Tetons. And this is actually an 8-frame stitched, 4 across the top, 4 across the bottom. But it lost a lot of its drama when I captured it because I have my camera tonal range set to low contrast and low saturation because I also use it for video, and that gives me the best tonal range capture. But my eyes see color differently. I have a different contrast range. I have much more tonal range than my camera does, and I need to bring things back the way I saw them, and that's what we're going to do today. It's not cheating. We're actually turning things into how our eyes saw it, so we go from what we just saw to something more like this. Now, how well you see this image on your screen, of course, depends upon if you've got your monitor calibrated. Monitor calibration, I talk about this all the time. It's really important because most monitors out of the box are not designed for photography. They're designed for all this multimedia stuff. You're watching movies and playing games and surfing the internet and typing in Word and then occasionally doing photography editing. Well, photography editing has a different set of requirements. It really requires that your monitor is showing you as accurately as possible exactly the data that's in your file. If that's not happening, then you're guessing when you do your edits, and you're going to be unhappy when you have your prints either come back from your lab or using your own printer. So you need hardware to do this. You can't do this by eye. Now there's a handful of options out there. A couple of my favorites here. I have from the left to right, we've got the ColorMonkey Display, the i1 Display Pro, the ColorMonkey Photo, and then the i1 Pro system. And there's range in there from $149 to $1,400. It all depends on what your needs are, and I'll invite you to go to X-Rite Photo to make sure that's okay. Now, one thing that I always hear, what's the difference between ColorMonkey Display and ColorMonkey Photo? And especially for those of you folks that have iMacs, you know you have brightness issues. These devices will get that under control. What all of these devices do, everything I just mentioned, they will calibrate and profile your monitors. They will also calibrate digital projectors. What the ColorMonkey Photo, the big boy on the right, does in addition to that is it will also create custom printer profiles. So if you're doing a lot of your own printing, particularly on fine art printers, then you want to take a closer look at the ColorMonkey Photo. I use all of these devices because I'm always showing people how to use them. Do I have a favorite? I like them all, actually. Of course, if money is no object, you have the i1 Pro. But I'm really a fan of the ColorMonkey and the i1 Display Pro and the ColorMonkey. I like them all. I'm sorry. I have them all to use, so I don't have to choose. But the bottom line is you don't want to be guessing when you're doing your edits. You want to make sure that what you're seeing on the screen is an accurate representation of the data that's in your file, because then you have a nice strong base upon which to edit from. You know that what you're seeing there is actually what is in your photograph. So we're going to move into Lightroom 4. And yes, this is the Lightroom 4 box. I know most folks, including myself, just download it from Adobe. That's what the box looks like. And if any of you have seen the box for Photoshop CS6, it's even weirder. I'm going to start off with some basic enhancements, and then we're going to get a little bit more heavy duty. For those of you that are still in version 3, Doug asked, good question. Is everything I'm going to show you pertain to version 3? Not quite everything. There's some new tools in version 4, and there's some new ways that the tools in version 4 work. I found the conversion over from Lightroom 3 to Lightroom 4 to be pretty quick. I think maybe I was working with a week and then I just deactivated my Lightroom 3. So if you haven't used 4 yet, then take a close look at it as we go through the editing process, because you'll see what's new and some of the advantages it has. To me, it's a no-brainer upgrade, but if you haven't done it yet, then everything I'm going to show you is applicable to Lightroom 2, or Lightroom 3 rather. You're just going to find it a little bit different on some of the editing stuff, right starting with the basic. So let's go there first. So I'm going to hide the left side of the screen just so we have a little more real estate. And this is a shot I took last week up in Seneca Falls, New York. A lovely little spot. And there's a couple of things going on here. Now, this was shot with a Canon 7D. And I typically had my cameras with the saturation turned down and the contrast turned down a little bit, because I also use those cameras for video, and that's recommended settings. So because of that, it came in a little bit flat. There was a lot more contrast and saturation to this scene, but that's okay because I have a really nice histogram. You can see here I've got nothing blowing out, and it's time to go in and do some edits. Now, first thing I will do, even though it's the last one because most people, probably the majority of people are not doing this yet, is I will adjust the camera profile. Now, there is an Adobe standard, and if you click on that, you can see I have a whole bunch of profiles for my 7D. And I'm just going to use my Canon 7D Daylight profile. And actually, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I want you to see something. I noticed that my 7D seems to have a smidge of a magenta cast to it. It's a little heavy on the magenta side. Might make skin tones look good, but it sends things off a little bit. So notice the bricks here. When I convert to the actual profile, they lose a little bit of that red. Now, you may have liked the red. That's a subjective thing, but by having a custom profile, then everything is going to fall into place perfectly, and then you can decide to make your edits later. Now, a couple of you asked, is there any reason to keep Lightroom 3 after using Lightroom 4? Really, no, there isn't. What I would do, however, is if you did have maybe you had a couple of extra computers and you only had a license for 2 installations for your Lightroom 4, is to deactivate it first. Now, the profiles, let's see who asked. Daniel asked, how are the profiles created? The profiles are created with a little device called the Color Checker Passport. Actually, let me go in here. I think I might have a picture of one. Let me get out of my smart collection here and just let me go to the library, and we'll go to the whole grid, and let's see, do I have a passport shot in here? I may not have. Oop, wait, let me get all of my images up. There we go. So let's see, do I have a passport? I'm just going to scroll through here quickly. And maybe not. That's a webinar also, which will also be, oh, there's a passport where our friend Bethany holding it. Okay, so that's what a Color Checker Passport looks like. And you don't get Bethany with it, just the passport. And to create a profile, it's really simple. You just take a photograph of the passport in the scene that you're shooting, and you simply go to File, Export with Preset, Color Checker Passport, give it a name, click Save, and that's it. That's as complicated as it is. It's really that simple. So let me go back to my... Now, these custom profiles are something that you create, so they're not embedded in Lightroom. It is something that you go ahead and make. All right, so let me go back to my Smart Collection, which is... Where's the one I just created? Lightroom Demos. Here we go. All right, so that's not the image I wanted. Where did our lovely Seneca Falls mill go to? Here it is. Okay. All right, so here we're back to our image. So I've got my profile set so I know that my colors are dialed in. And if this is something you're interested in, then I'd recommend you take a look at one of the Color Checker Passport webinars. I'll show you where they are later. So let's start with the Basic tab. Now, this has changed in Lightroom 4 versus Lightroom 3. Now, I already had my white balance set, so everything was fine there. Exposure-wise, yeah, it looks pretty good. Contrast looks fine to start as well. Now, what's changed is we've got different slider sets now. You remember there was the fill light in 3? Well, that's gone. Now we've got shadows, blacks, and whites, and highlights. And the other difference is, for example, in the past, you could add black to an image, but you couldn't subtract. Well, now all of these sliders are set to 0 in the middle, and you can go either direction with them. So if I go over to the right, that adds light into the shadows. However, I can also go to the left and darken the shadow areas. So all of these sliders work in both directions now. Now, one thing you might want to do, if you really want to get the, the most out of your exposure, if you know it was really a full scene, what you can do is go to the white slider and hold down the Alt or Option key. Now, I happen to be working on a Mac, but nothing is different on a PC, so don't worry about that. Hold down Alt or Option, and when you click on the white slider, it turns black. As I go off to the right, you can keep sliding until you see something show up, and when those things show up, you are then blowing them out. But if you just want to get everything right over to the right without actually clipping it, this is a visual way of doing that. And conversely, the same thing with the black slider. If I hold this in, I get a white screen, and if I increase the blacks, or make the blacks darker rather, you can see what ends up happening. It shows you, and it shows you in kind of individual colors and channels what's going on. So I just want to have a very little bit of dots there, and good. So now we've got our histogram spread out, so we're getting the most tonal range as possible. So what you do is, again, hold down the Alt or Option, sometimes it's labeled both on your keyboard, and click on the white slider, and you'll see the screen turn black, and you can push the whites over to the right until you start to see something show up, which would mean those things are starting to clip. And I want to go just to that point and back off. Same thing again, Alt left, Alt for the blacks. If I drag that to the left, you can see stuff starting to show up. So again, I just want to back off just so I get some little spikes. Again, I will get rid of my left panel so we can see stuff a little bit better. Okay, sound is bad again. All right, I don't know what's going on. Guess I'll have to use my built-in mic. Let's see if this works better. Okay, how's that? We have audio again? Yes, no? Okay. Again, I apologize. Somebody suggested maybe holding down the Alt key was throwing my audio off. Possible. Who knows these things? Okay, so we've got kind of our tonal range set. Now, something else that has changed a lot is the presence function inside of Lightroom here. And what ends up happening is the clarity is kind of like almost like a pseudo HDR. And it brings up a good question about really what is HDR anymore. Do you have to have multiple images to create an HDR? But a lot of times you can create an HDR simulation with just a single image. In fact, Matt Kluskowski wrote a very interesting article about that on Killer Lightroom Tips, which is a good website to visit, about really what defines HDR at this point. And really HDR is defined as a high dynamic range. Well, we can create that now with a single image. In fact, in Lightroom, the way to do that is kind of with the clarity slider. And the clarity slider is really handled differently in Lightroom 4 than previous versions. And if I drag this to the right, I can create almost, kind of a pretty grungy HDR look as I drag it over to the right. You can see that. Or, conversely, I can blur the thing so it's almost like a painting. So I frequently find myself adding a little bit of clarity. And what clarity does is it's kind of increasing localized contrast. So let's kind of get something just to bring out that detail. Then vibrance and saturation underneath that. Now what vibrance does is it increases the saturation of more muted colors, trying to leave skin tones alone. And it usually has a pretty good effect on blues. So you see the sky's a little weak. So as I increase the vibrance, you see the sky starting to gain a little bit of density. Now it does affect other colors as well, including the greens, but not like the saturation slider where if I start bringing that up, it adds color saturation to everything equally. Now I don't want to add that much. I find myself typically 10 to 15 points on my saturation slider. All right, the image is starting to look pretty good. And I think I'm done with this for now. By the way, if you want to reset these, if you find that you don't like what you've created, you can actually double click. Let me actually change the exposure just for a second. If I decide, oh, that was a mistake, you can just double click on the word and it will take you back. If you want to reset everything that you've just done, for example, in the tone, if I double click on the tone word here, it will reset everything. Same thing with presence. But I like where I am right now. All right, so this is the first step. I generally will work my way top down as I'm going through the develop module settings. Okay, let's see. All right, everything's Luke asks, are you assuming I'm working from a raw file? And yes, I am. If you take a look down at the bottom of the screen, in fact, you can see it right here. You see it's a CR2 file, which is a Canon raw file. This is off my 7D. All right, so we're starting to get pretty well along. Let me go ahead and move down to the next panel. Now, actually, there's a lot of folks that are really fond of the tone curve, especially for adjusting individual colors. Now, one of the easy ways to do this is to click on this targeted adjustment tool, and I can just click on that, and then when I come out into the image, you see as I move around the image, there's a little dot that appears on the curve. So if I wanted to bring these highlights down a little bit, I can click and drag down, and it will actually affect the curve. Now, me personally, I don't use this panel that much. I know there's folks that are really fond of it. I prefer the next panel down, the Use Saturation Luminance slider. So since I don't usually use this, here's a little trick if you want to clean up your menus in Lightroom. Right next to the words in any of your panels here, you can click in this area, control click or right click in here, and you'll see a list of all the adjustment panels as well as something called solo mode. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually turn off the curve, and you see now it's disappeared. I also rarely use split toning, so I'm going to hide that as well. They're not gone, they're just hidden, and it just simplifies my menu structure. Now this basic solo mode that you see, what it allows me to do, in fact, let me hide my histogram for a second. As I click on any panel, it automatically closes all the others, so you don't have to keep scrolling around too much to find out where you are. And that's called solo mode, and it's actually independent for every menu you're in. In fact, it works over here as well. You can see I can click next to history, and it has its own solo mode thing right here. So I do find that handy just to keep the screen clean, especially if you're dealing with a small screen like I am right now. I'm actually on my, my Mac 13-inch laptop. So a couple of people are asking about the other panels, and yep, we're heading there. So I'm just showing you my process for doing these edits. Let's go to Use Saturation Luminance. This is my favorite one. And I'm going to start with Luminance. What I want to do is I want to bring down the brightness of the sky. So again, I'm going to click on the target tool, just click in the blue sky, and just drag down with my mouse. And you can see that the sky is getting a nice darker blue. I can also change the saturation while I'm here. If I go up, it will increase the saturation. If I go down, it will decrease. Now, I think the sky with the added saturation is getting a little too cyan for my liking, so I want to change the hue of it. Now, I could go in and try to figure out, let's see, what are the opposites of the colors, or I can just make it simple and again bring up the targeted tool. And you'll see as I drag down, it makes it more cyan. As I drag up, it starts to warm the color into more of a blue that I'm after. Yeah, that's looking better. So after that, after I've done my Use Saturation Luminance, actually I'm going to bring down the water here a little bit as well. So let's bring the luminance of that down. I want to add a little depth into the water. And again, I don't know how well you're seeing this. You might still think the image is too light or too dark because you might not have a calibrated monitor. All right, so there we go. We're getting that a little darker. It's starting to look good. So again, moving on, I'm not going to do black and white right now. We'll save that for later. And you can just click, by the way, this little button here. You can turn that panel temporarily on and off and see what it is you've done. And look what that's done to the sky. Oops, didn't mean to hide that. So that's looking good. So next, detail. This is where your sharpening stuff is. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the building. And I have my navigator panel over here. So this is a good spot for me to take a look as far as sharpness goes. So for sharpening, the default is 25. I'll sometimes come up a lot higher depending on the image, and since I want the fine details of this building to show up, I'm actually going to go up to about 80, and you can see what happened. Now, if I'm after fine detail, I'll typically bring the radius down under 1, somewhere between either 0.7 or 0.8. Now, this detail slider here, what this determines is, actually, we can take a look at it, because there's a key for this too that's a little hidden. Again, hold down the Alt or Option key, click on the detail slider, and as I drag off to the right, it will show you kind of with this kind of embossed mask how much of the detail is being sharpened. If I turn it completely off, you're in essence turning off the sharpening. And if I turn it somewhere in the middle, it gives you a hint. Now, along with that is the masking slider underneath. Once again, our friend the Alt Option key. Click on there. Now, with this masking turned all the way to the left, the detail is being applied evenly to the entire image. Simply hold down the Alt key, click, and as you drag to the right, it'll start to show you, in essence, it's creating a mask, and it's showing I'm only going to apply the sharpening to those spots that remain in white. So it's a way to really focus in the sharpening and not end up sharpening large blocks of color that you don't necessarily want sharpened. So very cool stuff. Radius, somebody asked, what does the radius do? It affects on when you do a sharpening. Remember, we're dealing with individual pixels here. Radius determines how far out it's going to apply that sharpening. And how sharpening works is it increases the contrast at that local border. And by having a bigger radius, it's going to make it go out further. Now, if you have an image with it's kind of big, broad things without a lot of fine details, then a bigger radius is probably going to do you well. For something like this that's got a lot of fine detail like grit in the bricks, etc., then I'm going to want to have the radius small. Now, noise reduction is something that's going to be more important if you have an image that's been underexposed. Actually, let me just go into a dark area. Let me go right over here, and I'm going to zoom in at 200% and see if I see any noise. Not really on this one because there was no underexposure on this. I'll show you a night shot in a little bit that's got a lot of noise in it, so we'll get to that in a second. So this particular image doesn't need any noise reduction because it was well exposed and it was shot at a low ISO. So we'll leave that for now and we'll come back to that. So let's take a look at lens corrections. Now, as I mentioned, this was a Canon 7D, and chances are the lens I have is going to be here in the database. So if I click on there, oops, oh, this was when I borrowed the lens from somebody. Oh, I borrowed this from my friend. Actually, I think it was my Canon lens. Yes, I'm sorry. It wasn't an 80-200 though. This was a 24-70, so I just got to go in and find that in my list, which is way up here. It's a 24-70 2.8. Okay, now if I turn this on and off, you can see that the lens has a little bit of distortion off on the edges. And you can see when I turn this on, it just kind of straightens that out to fix that little bit. Now, let's see, a couple of other questions. Oh, Mike asks, is it hurt to use noise reduction anyway? Well, noise reduction does soften the image a little bit by doing some blending in the shadows, so I would not turn it on if it doesn't need it. That's really kind of the bottom line. And just a real quick check, I just want to double check that the audio is still good. Can you guys let me know in the control panel that you're not hearing any problems? Okay, thank you. We're good. Yeah, apparently the Alt key really is messing around with the audio, so I got to stay away from that. Okay, so we're good here. Now, this distortion and vignetting. Actually, let's take a look at here. We've got maybe a very slight bowing in this image because of the wide angle. So let's go to manual on our profile, and if I drag the vertical slider, you can see I can bend the image kind of like a perspective control, and I'm going to go just a little bit minus just to straighten out kind of the edges of the building just a smidge, so that you can see here I got this line on this building lining up, so that looks pretty straight. Now, what distortion is, it's kind of a pincushion barreling. But let me show you what it does. There's sometimes when it's handy to do this, and you can see as I come in, that will make it go out. But if I go in, it has the effect of straightening things out on wide-angle lenses a little bit. So you can see there, yeah, I kind of like what that did. And then lastly, underneath here, there's a constrained crop. By the way, if you are shooting buildings, you can mess around with the horizontal bend as well. So it's almost like having tilt shift on a view camera. You have all kinds of controls here after the fact. And rotate is what you think it is, rotates the image. Scale actually, yeah, zooms in. Constrained crop will automatically get rid of the gray that has appeared because of the adjustments I've made. So we can click on that and give it a second to catch up and it'll get rid of it. Now, lens vignetting. Is your lens vignetting or do you want to add lens vignetting? So you see I can add or subtract lens vignetting. Some people like that effect. I prefer to have control of it after the fact. So we'll get to that in a second. Now, in effects, sorry, my constrained crop just doesn't seem to want to work right now. We'll see if it catches up in a sec. In effects, here's where you do post-crop vignetting. So if you want to add white to the edges or you want to do black, not something I would typically do for a landscape. I might actually darken the edges a little bit like that. Just a little bit. Kind of centers you into the image a little bit more. And while you're there, you can make it round or you can make it square. There's also grain, which I typically wouldn't do for a color image, but when I do black and white, Lightroom does a pretty passable version of grain. All right, last thing I'm going to do to this image. I'm going to go back up to basic and look up here, and I've got the editing tools. I'm going to use the crop tool. And I want to change kind of the perspective of this image a little bit. So I'm going to put my horizon or my base right at that bottom rule of thirds line and bring that up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to come up even a little more because I kind of see this as a panoramic a little bit. And just hit return and it's pretty good shape. Now I'm pretty much about done with this image. In fact, I'm going to do some demos on some other ones that'll cover some other items. Remember, all this cropping stuff, everything we've done in Lightroom is non-destructive. You can always go back. And if you want to see what you've done, I'm going to hit Shift-Tab, which will get rid of all my menus. And then I'm going to hit the Y key. And Y is compare. And I can see my before and after as soon as it catches up here. So you can see my before, before and after images, and you can kind of compare what it is that you've done. And you can, while you're in here, let me go back to my full screen. Hold on a second. Let me turn off the compare. And by the way, all of these things, you're never going to remember all these things until you start using them for a while. All of this stuff is under Tools and View. All right, so that was the lights out, by the way. So if you go to View, you can see before and after. And there was the Y, which puts it left, right. You can also, which might make more sense for this image, you can go top, bottom if you're dealing with a panoramic image. And we'll let it catch up. And again, Shift-Tab to hide my menus. And then the L key is the lights key. So if I hit it once, it dims the rest of the stuff on the screen. And if I hit it twice, it will make everything else black. So it's a good way to compare what you've done so far. So L one more time, Shift-Tab to bring my menus back. So John Desero asked me a question. John, how are you? Haven't seen you in a while. Why crop last? That's a good question. It's really, for me, just kind of a subjective thing. Sometimes I will crop early. It's going to depend on the individual image. I might want to do an edit on the whole image, and I might completely change my mind how I want the image to be presented. I might take something like this and decide, gee, I'm curious what it would look like as a square. Maybe not obvious, but let's take a look. I'm going to go to the square crop, and I can move this around and change the size, and I realize, well, no, that was a bad idea. Actually, though, it is kind of an interesting point of view, so it really depends what you want to do. I do generally crop towards the end. And I've got it stuck on 1 by 1 here, so let me turn my crop back to a custom and Let's get off of that one by one thing and put it back how I originally had it. And again, that's the beauty. Again, this is non-destructive. You can always go back. And then I hit done. All right, now I know some of you are just itching to get into these tools up here, so we'll go with that in the next image. Now, Peter asked a question. Now, I've gone through all these edits. Yes, I could just do I could select a bunch of images and click on sync, but what if I like what I've done for this particular image and I decide I want to save this as a preset? Maybe this is going to be a standard edit that I'm going to do all the time to landscapes. Good point. So what I can do is go over to the presets menu, which is over here on the left, and create a new preset just by clicking on the plus sign here. And I don't know what I call it. Let's see. I'll call it landscape start. So maybe this is something I would do. And is there anything I would not want to put here? No, I'd probably pick everything. So then I just click on create, and there it is. The preset now shows up. In fact, just for giggles, let's go to another image. That's looking a little on the flat side. Let's take this one of Yellowstone Falls. And this is an edit I was going to do later anyway, but let's just click on this preset after this image loads, finishes loading, and let's see what it does. It might not be applicable to this image, but let's find out. So I click on Landscape Start, and all of the settings we just used get applied to this image. In this case, it made the sky too dark, but it actually is, it's not horrible on the rest of the image, and I was going to crop into here anyway, so yes, that's how you create a preset. It's really that easy. All right, let's move on to something that's a little more first aid-y. You got an image that, I kind of messed up on my exposure. Now, somebody asked where the plus sign was. Let me just close this window. You can see it right here. Oh, here's the plus sign. Anytime you want to add a preset, you can either have this open or closed. If you click on the plus sign, it automatically brings up the create new preset. Another good question. Somebody asked, does it auto-save? Do you need to save often? Well, no, there actually is no saving because we're not actually doing anything to the image. When you do all of these effects to images in Lightroom, all you were doing is giving it a set of commands that when you're finally ready to actually export or output the file, then all that stuff gets applied. You can always go back at any time and reset it back to its raw image because we haven't actually done anything to it yet. Now, you might notice if you have Lightroom 4, there's a couple of panels hidden, and you can customize the interface depending on what you use. If you take a look at this gray area, like here I am in Basic, just to the left, if you Control or right-click for a PC guy, you'll see you can turn on your panels here. And also notice that I have something turned on called Solo Mode, which is right there. And what Solo Mode does, let me hide my histogram for a second. What Solo Mode does is, as I click on a panel, if I click on another panel, it closes the last one I had open. This way you don't have this incredibly long stream of panels all open. You have to keep scrolling up and down to get to your stuff. And again, to access that, just click in this gray area, Control click or right click, and you can turn these on and off. Now, me personally, I don't usually use the tone curve and the split toning, so I usually have those hidden, but we'll leave them open for today. So how do I go through the edit process? Well, I add one step. One thing I do is I have custom camera calibration files, camera profiles for my cameras. And you see here's the Adobe standard. Let me open up my histogram again. This was shot with a Canon 7D. And this is a RAW file. You can see down here it says it's a CR2. That's a Canon RAW. And if I click on my profile, you can see I have profiles specifically for my Canon. And this was in Jackson Hole. So I click on there, and did you see the color shift? Take a look mostly at the sky. For some reason, my Canon, and I think this is common to these cameras, my 7D is a little bit overly magenta and has a tendency to diminish my blues a little bit. And also the profile has a tendency to do that also. Notice the blue has gotten a little lighter, and the color temperature in here is different. When I apply the profile, notice the color shift, particularly up in the sky. And this is important. This is a subject for another day where I'll talk about profiles. But But camera profiles will dial in all your colors, and it's based on the color checker passport. So if you're interested in camera profiles, check out the webinar called Raw Color Power where I talk about the passport. So first thing I did was do that. Then I'll work up to the basic panel. Now the basic panel is somewhat new in Lightroom 4 versus Lightroom 3. And what's changed are the sliders here in a couple of different ways. First of all, there's more of them. I used to really rely on the fill light in Lightroom 3, and I was disappointed it disappeared in 4. Once I got used to these new sliders, I like them much better. In fact, I think about 2 weeks after, maybe a week after I got Lightroom 4, I deactivated my Lightroom 3 and removed it. And also notice that you can go both ways with all these sliders. In the past, if you think of Lightroom 3, you had a black slider and the default was like 5, but you could never go below 0. Now you can. So what this means is, as I go over to the right, I can make my blacks lighter. I can also make them darker, which is something new. Now, if you get something out of whack and you want to get it back, you can just double click on the word and it put it back to 0. If I made a whole bunch of crazy changes, in fact, let me just randomly make a bunch of funky changes to this image. Maybe your cat walked on your keyboard as you were doing some edits and you say, whoa, that's wrong. You can double click on the heading word and that will reset everybody back to 0 as well. Just kind of shortcut that'll speed things up. So I look at this image, I look at my histogram. Now, to my eye, the image looks great on the screen. The histogram is saying maybe it's a little dark because I've got all these blacks here. This was actually one of 3 shots that I had done for an HDR, but I'm going to see if we can do it just by dealing with this single image. Now, like before, you can also click on the histogram to drag. So I can literally click on black and drag it over. I'm finding that I like to have a little bit of black in there. Now I'm going to take a chance here. As I mentioned earlier this morning, when I went to the Alt key, my audio screwed up. So I'm going to try it one more time. All right, so here we go. Alt. I'm going to click on the black and you see the screen turns white. And if I drag it off to the right, I can disappear or make those disappear. If I come off to the left, I can make more black. So I'm just going to go just to the point where it just starts to disappear. It's okay to have a little bit of the colors channels in there. All right, that's good. Same thing with white. If I hold down the Alt key, and I did hold down the Alt key, so okay, what happened? Did my sound still go? You guys let me know if the sound goes funky. Or did I turn my own sound off? Let's see. Nope, my sound's on. Okay. So you can hear me. Okay. So again, Alt key, white, click on white and it turns black. And if I drag it off to the right until I get white start to clip, then you'll see them actually show up in there. Now I don't want to clip these. I'm just going to push them over to the right a little bit because I kind of want to get the snow on the top of the peaks to be close to white. All right, so there's white and black. Now shadows. Let's open up the shadows a little bit just by dragging that to the right. And my highlights are actually pretty okay. I'm going to leave that alone for this particular image. In fact, also, I'm going to shrink this menu so we can have a little bit more room. In fact, I'm going to hide my bottom menu too. This way we have a little more screen real estate. Now, presence is a fun one, and it's very different. It's very different compared to Lightroom 3. The way it handles. It's almost like a single frame HDR, and that's what this clarity slider does. What clarity does is it increases local contrast. So when it sees an area of contrast, it's going to increase it, and the more you drag it over to the right, the more kind of crunchy HDR it's going to start to look. And conversely, like if I dragged it all the way off to the left, I can blur the entire image. But let's take a look and see what a little bit of clarity does. And just look at that little bit. Look how it really increases the fine detail. And this is something, the way this is handled is very different in Lightroom 4 versus anything previous. For you Nick guys, it's kind of similar to the structure slider in Nick Viveza and Color Effects and Silver Effects. Now Vibrance, moving down, Vibrance affects colors that are a little bit less saturated, particularly cool colors, without as much as affecting things that are like skin tones. So if I bring the Vibrance slider up, you can see the blue gets more intense, but the yellows kind of in the foreground, which are closer to a skin tone, do not. So I can bring the Vibrance up a bit. And then lastly, let's see. Overall saturation is probably pretty good. Let me just add a little more. All right. So we've got our exposure settings pretty good. And let's take a look and see where we are. If you hit the Y key, or actually if you come up to View, Before After, you can see you can hit the Y key, it'll show you left and right. If you do Command Y, it is up and down. So let's just hit the Y key and see what happens. And it will show us the image before and after. And you can see there we are. That's how far we've come from the before to the after. And looking pretty good. Let's continue our edit. So I hit Y again to toggle back to my image. And let's move down to the next one. Alright, so let's go to Use Saturation Luminance. I mentioned tone curve. I personally do not use the curves that much since I use Saturation Luminance. This is my way of doing edits, but if you want to adjust the tone curve, you have a targeted adjustment tool right here on pretty much all these menus. If I wanted to maybe bring up these shadows, you can see as the cursor hovers over an area, you can see on the curve here that a dot appears. So you don't have to know where your curve is. So if I wanted to just bring that up a little bit, I just click and drag up, and you can see the dot on the curve starting to come up. And same thing here. If I think this is a little too dark, I can bring it up. And I can lighten up my sky a little bit. And this gray in here on the mountains, maybe I want to bring that down. So you can adjust tonal curves that way. You can also click on this little button here and see your befores and afters of what you've just done. And actually in this case, it actually did work pretty well. Alright, so let's move on from the tone curve. Let's go to Use Saturation Luminance, which is one I use all the time. So let's go to the Target Adjustment tool. Now I find that the blue has gone a little bit too cyan for me. I want a little bit more warmth into that, and I'm not sure how much I need. So what I'm going to do is click on the hue, click my Targeted Adjustment tool, and I'm going to warm it up. Now you see as I click it right, it makes it more purple. I don't want purple. If I go down, it will make it very cyan. What I kind of want to go is just a little bit warmer to kind of get a little bit more of a neutral blue there. That looks good. Wonderful. And what else did I want to do here? Saturation we've kind of taken care of. Luminance, let's try that. Let's bring up the luminance in these shadows a little bit. So again, I have the Target Adjustment tool. I'm going to just click and drag up a little bit. And fine. Now, I want to add a little bit more local contrast to this image. And now here's where the fun stuff comes in. And the real powerful stuff in Photoshop, or Lightroom rather, is going to be this, the brush tool. However, before we go there, I want to check my detail. So let's zoom in. Let me bring back my navigator. Let's go at 50%. And I'm going to zoom into the distant peaks. And I want to add a little bit of sharpness because you see there's a default amount of sharpening here. I want to increase it. I'm going to come about halfway. And you'll see it has a big effect on the sharpening. Now, if I'm after fine detail sharpening and not kind of large area sharpening, I'll bring the radius down below 1. So let's go to 0.7 here. And what detail does is, if I turn this all the way off, it actually turns off the sharpening. If I go to 100%, then it sharpens everything equally. And once again, I could hold down the Alt key. Let's go and risk it. I hold down the Alt key, and you see kind of an emboss mask that shows how much of the image will be sharpened. And again, if I turn it all the way off, then there's no sharpening going on. So we'll go kind of with the default. Now, this image was pretty well exposed, so there shouldn't be too much noise. There's a little, very little bit in the sky. In fact, let's go 100%. And you can see we've got a little bit of grain noise in the sky. So I'm going to click on Noise Reduction right here. And you'll see as soon as it kicks in that that's pretty much going to disappear. And once again, how much detail do you want to maintain? I'll slide that over a bit. Now this image was not underexposed, so that's when color noise shows up. I'll show you one of those in a little bit more. Now what else do I want to do detail here? Actually, that's pretty much it. I see I have a little, look at that, I have a little spot on my sensor. Let's get rid of that. I didn't think I was going to be doing blemish retouching today, but just so you can see where it is, let's go to this tool, which I didn't even plan on using, the spot removal tool. So I'm going to use the left bracket to bring it down so it's just about the size of the spot. And now something also that's new in here in this tool, as I bring this down, is notice you have a choice between clone and heal. So heal is kind of like the content aware tool in Photoshop, where it will look for something that's appropriate. Clone will actually allow you to copy something from one place to another. So I'm going to use the heal brush for this, and I'm going to click on here, and you have two choices. I can just click and let it go, and it will figure out an area to use from, or if I don't like what it picked from, and if maybe it causes some kind of odd extra, as this one probably would, or I can click and then drag, and I can tell it wherever in the image I want to sample from, and I'll sample from there. Then I click on done. When you see I got a little funky one, I did an extra. Let me undo that. I did an extra click there, so it did a little extra heal, which we did not want to do. By the way, and this is something you might also notice, that it is one downside. Lightroom 4 is somewhat slower than Lightroom 3. It's got a lot of stuff going on under the hood. So let's do that one more time. Let me get my brush, and actually I'm going to clone right next to it. Let's just clone it. I'm going to click here. I'm holding down the click. I'm coming off to the left here where the sky is clean, and you can see it finally catches up and disappears, and then I let go, and then it just clones that piece over, and I'll hit done. Okay, I didn't plan on doing that today, but there we are. All right, so let's continue on down. We'll go to lens corrections, and I'm going to enable lens corrections. If the metadata of the file is recognized by Lightroom, if it sees the lens, it will apply a correction. So you see here I had a 24-70 on here. And as I turned it on and off, if you look in the corners, now the image looked fine. You didn't realize there was a little bit of distortion going on in the corners, but watch when I click on the lens correction, you can see the image straightens out. So it fixes that automatically. Now there's also chromatic aberrations that can occur, and this can happen at high contrast areas. Let's take a look up in the pine needles here and see if we're going to see any. In this case, now this image is pretty clean, got maybe a very little bit going on. So what you can do is simply click on the default, remove chromatic aberrations, and if it sees them, it will automatically fix them. And actually it did. If you actually notice, it did actually clean up around the pine needles a little bit. If you have one of those really bad green on one side, magenta on the other side things, you can actually use the eyedropper to click on the offending color, and it will figure it out for you. This is pretty slick in the new version. So in manual, I'm going to save this for another image because that will apply to when I have something architectural. Under effects, you can add vignetting. You can add a bunch. You can make it light by dragging to the right. That'll get a white vignette. You can go black. Something I would do more for portraits and landscapes, but I will sometimes add a very slight bit of dark vignetting, which kind of keeps you in the center of the image a little bit more. So that's kind of handy. The grain slider would be something that you would use if you're going to do a black and white conversion and you want to add like a film-like grain. I've never found a use for doing it in a color image. All right, so now let's get to the fun stuff, the real high-end stuff in Lightroom 4, and actually existed in Lightroom 3 as well, and that's the adjustment brush. This is going to allow me to change colors, paint light, dark, etc. in very localized areas. And what I'm after is, and again, let me give myself a little bigger image to play with. I'm going to use the left bracket to shrink this down. What I want to do is select the peaks out here because I want to increase the contrast in these. Since they're off in the distance and there actually was some mist and a little bit, actually I think there was some smoke left over from the fire, it made them a little hazier than I wanted. So what I'm going to do is leave on Auto Mask, which you can see right down here. And I'm going to click on Show the Overlay, and then I'm going to start painting in here. And what it's going to do is create a mask. And you can notice even though my brush overlaps the green, it's only picking up where that plus is, where that crosshair is. So I can come right up to the sky as well. And I'm just kind of following this around. And yes, I should be using my tablet when I do this. Believe it or not, I'm actually using my trackpad right now. Shame on me. I do use a Wacom tablet. And you can also let go at any point. and come over to another area and add to it. Now, if by chance you pick something you didn't want, maybe you slip and click on something like in the middle of the trees there, like I just did there, if you hold down the Alt key, it turns into a minus, and then you can just paint over it and it'll get rid of it. Now, Glenn asks, do I use the adjustment brush at the beginning of my changes or at the end? I don't know if I have a hard and fast rule by that. I guess it depends on what the subject matter is. I probably usually save it more towards the end, but we'll see in the next image, see when I feel it's important to use it. So again, I'm going to add in here just this little bits behind the tree and this little bit of that other peak that's kind of being hidden a bit. So now I'm going to turn the overlay mask off so I can actually see my effects. And you see I have almost a complete set of adjustments here. And I want to do two things. I want to increase the contrast. I want the mountain peaks to pop, and I want those grays to go a little darker. I'm going to bring the shadows down. Again, I want to make that distant gray a little darker. And I'm going to increase the clarity. And that's going to add some more contrast to it. And that's pretty slick. So I hit done, and again, I can hit the Y and take a look at my before and after. And let's take a look and see what we got. I think we're about done with this image. Let's take a look and see what we've got. And actually, I'm going to hit Shift-Tab to hide all of my menus. And then I'm going to hit the L key for lights. And as soon as this catches up, and that will allow me to toggle the lights on and off. So if I hit it once, that will dim the lights in Lightroom. And if I hit it twice, that will give me a black background if it ever decides to catch up with me. Oh, interesting. I notice I'm looking at another screen to see what you guys are seeing. I notice it doesn't show you my spinning beach ball when it's taking its time. So there we have the image left and right, so you can see the edit before and after. So you can see with Lightroom, you can do global changes easily, and you can also do local changes. You can notice what happened to that distant peak. It's gotten a lot better. So let me let this catch up, and you can see I can zoom in on here, let the image redraw eventually. Come on, catch up. For some reason I think my computer's running very slowly today. Okay, there we go. So Shift-Tab to bring my menus back, and let's get everything reset. All right, so we have a nice edit there. Let's move on to something completely different. Okay, so here's an image that just something kind of urban. I actually took this planning to use it as a background and then putting somebody in front of it kind of in a grungy, gothy kind of way. But no matter what I did, the color balance of the scene was way beyond what I could even set my camera at. So the first thing I needed to do was go to basic. And you can see I shot it at 3200. It's actually way lower than that. The lights were very orangey, kind of sodium vapor. And you can see as I continue to come over, now it's gotten a little bit more neutral. So again, let's go through this process again. This time we're going to add a couple of tools, including taking a closer look at noise. Now exposure is fine. If we take a look at it, up in here we've got black clipping and white clipping highlights. You can see I can turn that on. Obviously these light bulbs are clipped because of the scene. Nothing I could do about it. This was about, if I remember right, this was about a 15-second exposure. So they're going to be clipped. They're gone. I wanted to get kind of that streaky effect. So what I did was I had my camera at f/22 to shoot this. So exposure is good. I've got a nice continuous tone. Yeah, they're blown out, but they're gone. There's nothing I can do about that. So I'm going to increase the blacks a little bit to add a little bit more density to the image. I'm also going to increase the shadows a smidge. I'll try to bring down the whites a little bit to try to take a little bit of their power off. That's looking better. Now, again, I want this to look kind of grungy. So I'm going to really increase the presence on this one and the clarity. And look what it does to that. Look how it brings out the graffiti on the wall. Really what I was after. Very cool. Now, I do want to add some vibrance and saturation into this image. However, it's already pretty vibrant, almost too vibrant with the sky and the grass. So what I'm going to do is use the graduated filter tool right here. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click so I go from here over. Now, I clicked in the middle. What happens is from this point over to the right is 100% of the effect. This is 50%, and then the other one here is where it would end. So if I just want to add some saturation to this, for example, so I can bring some of the colors out a little more. That's good. I'm going to even increase the clarity a little more. And conversely, I'm going to create another one. Over here, I want to take out the saturation of this blue sky a bit. So I'm going to decrease the saturation there, just so it becomes less important. Bring down the shadows and take away some of the saturation. Now, one last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to hit done. I want to darken up just this foreground area a little bit, because again, imagine I'm going to put a person in front of this. Now, David asks, how come no exposure or contrast adjustment? Well, in this particular image, I didn't think it needed it. Now, one of the things about Lightroom, just as with Photoshop, and I've been teaching Photoshop for 20 years, scary though that sounds, there are many different ways to get to kind of the same effect. What I'm showing you are my favorite ways of doing this. Could I have, right at the beginning, gone into contrast and exposure and played around with that way? Possibly. I might have gotten a very similar look. But I've found just from experience that the ways that I'm doing this have worked well for me. So what I'm going to do now is get the adjustment brush. I'm going to give myself a little bigger brush. And this time I'm going to turn off the auto mask, because I don't want to, I want it to kind of go just wherever I paint. So again, I can turn the mask on and off right here. You're going to find yourself doing this a lot. And the O key, just typing the O, letter O on your keyboard, will also toggle it on and off. Also, if you don't like the red overlay and you want it to be green, you can have green too. So I'm just going to start painting here. I just kind of want to darken this up a bit. And I get to see what I chose. It went a little into the wall. Actually, in this case, I think that's going to work for me, so that's good. So I hit O to hide that, come back in here, and now I'll bring down the exposure, and you can see it darkens just that foreground. Now it's starting to really look the way I want it. And what else might I want to do here? I could even tone it. Let's try that. Let's just see. I don't know that I want to do it for this image. And remember, I haven't hit done yet, so my overlay is still live. If I click on the color tone, and I decide I want to see what would this look like with a slight red tone to it, I might not like it, but let's see what it does. And I can change the density of that. If I wanted to warm it up a bit, no, I don't like it, but it was there. You could have done that. You can tone things as well by doing that. So let's undo that. Let that catch up. By the way, also in the history panel, you can see it's already said the undo toning. It hasn't caught up yet. This history panel stays with the image, and it shows you all the edits that you've done to the image along with exact settings. And as you scroll through them, you can see in the thumbnail above exactly what's happened. The cool thing about it is the history, unlike Photoshop, history stays with the file. So if you quit Lightroom and come back to the same image in a week, all those history moments will still be there. Now, someone asked, how about using Viveza and control points? Ted asked that. Absolutely. It's kind of very similar, but what I'm doing is a lot of Viveza kind of like stuff without actually using Viveza, so I didn't have to actually buy anything else. So let me just kind of take a zoom in again. I just want to look around, and okay, I'm good. So let me, again, I want to undo that, that toning, and I think I'm done with this image. So again, let's take a look. Let's hit the letter Y, and we can see our before and after of that image. And look, again, pretty dramatic image, and I may even grunge this up a little bit more later, but just imagine having a portrait of somebody dramatically lit standing in that scene. And that's kind of what I was using this for, and I think that's going to end up being kind of cool. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. Somebody asked, how am I doing undo? Oh, it's just the universal undo, Command or Control Z. That's all. Just what I did. I just hit Control Z a couple times. I could have also come into the history panel and just backed up. I could have backed it up to any point. Like you can see, I have in here, you see the background, the foreground that I darkened went away. Or I can put it back by going to that exposure adjustment. You can see what happened right there. All right. Actually, let me see. Let's go into just something completely different for a second. And I just want to discuss, this is a good image too for discussing noise. And this is something that Lightroom 4 is pretty amazing at. Oops, let me get rid of my adjustment brush there. So this is Zion National Park, and yet this is about a 15-second exposure at ISO, probably 6400 or 3200, something like that. And it's pretty noisy, as this was just really shot for the stars. And as I zoom in, you can see it's relatively sharp, but it could use some sharpening. The danger about sharpening something like this is, since it was such a long exposure at such a high ISO, there's going to be a lot of noise in it. Also, by the way, notice in this image, this was actually shot before I went to Lightroom 4. So it actually uses the older process, which was called 2010. You definitely want to update to the new process. And when you do that, it has a better way of noise reduction. And when you do clarity and things like that, it just works better. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to go right to detail, and I'm going to zoom back in on this image. So let's take a look at detail. Now, I'm going to see what happens if I sharpen here a little bit, just to bring out a little bit more of the mountainside. And not too bad. Now, this image is actually surprisingly clean for an image at this high ISO. So let's sharpen it up even a little bit more to bring out the sides of these peaks. And let's look at it at 100%. So now you can start to see a little bit more of the grain, particularly in the sky now, with that much sharpening. Probably too much for a dark image like this. Radius again. If you're going after fine detail, turn the radius down. If it's global kind of bigger things, then go higher with the radius, maybe at 1.5 or 2. Again, the detail slider, if I turn this all the way to the left, it in essence is turning off the sharpening. If I bring it to the right, it's showing, it's applying sharpening to more of the image. And then lastly, masking. Again, I'll hit the Alt key. You can see where the detail sharpening will be applied. So if I bring the masking over, I can decide, yeah, I really don't need to be sharpening the sky, just the borders. And that'll do a better job of it. Now, noise reduction. Let's actually go 200%. I'm going to go 2 to 1 here because I want to see some noise. So let's add some noise reduction. And when you do that, you do it at a sacrifice of a little bit of clarity. Also color noise. And we can see that there's a little bit of grain in the side of the mountain here. But considering it's almost pitch black, there's really relatively little noise there. So just to see what we've accomplished so far, let me turn this detail off. I can turn this off right here. Watch what happens before and after. There's our before and there's after. So you can see it has gotten substantially cleaner. So let's go back to our 1-to-1. In fact, let's see the whole image again. And I want to change the color temperature again a little bit. And now you can see this is a PSD file. So I don't have the exact same control, but I still have the ability to change the color temperature. And I want to make the sky a little less yellow, even though there was a glow from a distant town off in the distance. I want to make it a little bit bluer to kind of more simulate how I viewed the sky. And I think maybe to add a little more drama, I'm going to open up the shadows a bit to open up that foreground. And then I'm going to use the graduated filter tool to adjust the color individually. So again, I click on the graduated filter. I'm going to drag it at a slight angle. By the way, if you hold down the Shift key, it will make it perfectly vertical or horizontal. But I want it actually at a slight angle. I want to kind of follow the contour here. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit to give myself a little more gradation. I think that looks nicer. And I can also make the sky, just the sky, go bluer and leave the foreground kind of that orangey. And I'm going to increase the clarity to kind of get the stars to pop out a little bit more. I can also adjust noise. All right, so I like that. And now I'm going to, rather than leave here, I'm going to click on New, and I'm going to do the same thing for the foreground. I'm going to bring that up. So remember, when you drag the graduated filter, It's 100% at one end, goes to 50, and then to 0. If you want this transition to be much sharper, you can simply make it thinner. I can click on this line, make it thinner here, drag the control point, and now everything below this line will be 100% of the effect. From here to here, the middle will be 50, and then 50 fading off to nothing. So if I want to cool this off a little bit too, I'm going to take a little bit of the orange out in the foreground. I can make that a little bit more neutral. I'm going to desaturate it a little bit as well, because I want my focus on the sky. And yeah, it's pretty good. I think lastly, I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit on the overall image. Not too much though, because it's supposed to be a night sky. I don't want the horizon to be getting too light. And again, I'll get rid of my left panel, and let's hit Y to see before and after where we went. So you can see it's a little bit of a different tonal. This was more of a subtle edit, but if we zoom in, you'll notice that the clarity, noise-wise, when it eventually catches up, is less. So it's something to play with. It's a trade-off when you're dealing with this clarity and the noise reduction versus your sharpness. All right, so let's go back into our full panel. So again, the L key will cycle through your lights. Shift-Tab will hide all of your menus. You can also do them individually. You can also click on these little arrows to get rid of them. How are we doing on time-wise? 1:46. All right, let's do one more quick edit. Let me go to my 3 filter. Let me bring up something else. Actually, I'm going to back off to 2. I think I have one here I wanted to use. Maybe it's a 1. Let's scroll over. I'll do something urban here. Nope, that one's not even there. Okay. All right, this is a fun place. The Thunderbird restaurant, just outside the. Oh no, you know what? I'm not going to do Thunderbird. Let's go to this. Oh, it's not even there. We'll use this one. It's not there either. Apologies. All right, we're back at the Thunderbird. This is just outside the east entrance of Zion National Park, and this is going to allow us to do a little bit of perspective control, and we'll also see how this is going to print. Now, a couple things first. What would I do? I'm going to check the cropping because I'm going to rotate this. I can see I have a slight angle here. So I'm just going to click on there, and as soon as I click, I get a grid, and then I can rotate this back and forth, and I'm just lining up that bottom line so that this part of the image is straight. When I hit done, it automatically crops it. That's a good start. Now my foreground's a little light, so again, let's go through the process. Let's fill in the shadows a little bit, but I do want to add a little contrast to the image at the same time. Before I do any more editing, let's go do our camera calibration. This is a daylight shot, and did you see the sky just pop? So here's the Adobe Standard. Take a look at the sky up here above the sign, and when I go to my custom calibration, you'll see it brings back a little of the density of the sky. The sky out west in Arizona and Utah is a little bit denser blue because there's less water in the atmosphere, and for some reason the Adobe Standard profile kind of takes away from that a bit. So lens corrections, I'll click on my profile and tell it to enable, and you can see again, see how it straightens out and gets rid of some of the vignetting, particularly on the bottom here. This was a 17 to 55, so there's a little more distortion than our 24. And again, you don't really notice it until you click it on. You see, oh yeah, it looks better. So then under manual, we've got our vertical transform, which is kind of like a tilt shift lens, and it allows me to straighten out the perspective of the image. So I just want to straighten it out a smidge, just to make that a little cleaner, a little straighter. And then if I click on Constrain Crop, that one little bit, you notice down here, if I'll undo that, you'll see, turn that off. Let's undo that. You see this little bit of gray right here that it kind of got cropped off because of our slight perspective adjustment. When I click on Constrain Crop, then that goes away, and we get to see the entire image. So what else might I want to do to this? Let's go back to our basic. Let's add a little presence to really make the sign start to pop. We'll add a little saturation. Now this is something where we've got a warm sky, but because the foreground is in shadow, it's a different color temperature. So that's something new for Lightroom 4 that we get to play with in both the graduated filter and in the adjustment brush. So I'm going to use the adjustment brush for this, and I will turn on my auto mask, and I'll turn on O to show my selected mask, and I'm just going to start painting in the foreground. And I can do it pretty roughly. Again, remember it's on auto mask, so it completely ignores the sky. I can add the little spots I've missed. And I got a little extra. So I hold in the Alt key to get it off my sign. I could have kept that, really, it wouldn't have hurt anything. And off of the flag here. And I'll hide my mask. And now this time all I'm going to do is change the color temperature. It needs to be warmed up a little bit because the shadow is more blue. And you can see I could come crazy over to the right. But you can see what it's doing is it's changing the color temperature just of the shadow areas, which really makes the image look a lot nicer. So now we've got the warmth of the sky in the distance, yet our foreground now has that color temperature affected just in there. And this is something new in Lightroom 4. Marlene asked, do I generally keep the density at 100%? For me, yeah. Sometimes I'll turn it down a little bit. That's something you have to play. That's your personal preference. Sometimes I will turn the flow down a little bit. But generally I find, since I'm making very fine adjustments up in my sliders, I will usually paint at 100%. That's something you're going to have to play with a little bit. Oh, there's a can inside the planter that's driving somebody. It's the can. Let's take a look. It's driving somebody nuts. It's actually a bit of wiring. Yeah, typically I would go into Photoshop to fix stuff like that. I could try using the healing, the spot removing brush to try to get rid of that using, let's scroll up. I can use the clone tool, and let's see if I can actually do a decent job of getting rid of that. Let's see if it'll work. And let's see, when we let go, will it start to disappear? Yeah, it starts. It would take a little work. Again, this is the kind of thing that Photoshop is better at. If you have any heavy duty kind of stuff like this. Yes, you can do a lot of this in Lightroom. Let's see if, but you can see it's a little more awkward than this. This is better. This is the kind of stuff that's better done in Photoshop. So yes, you can do. You can. It's good for blemishes of a sort, but when you start to have to remove this much stuff, then you're probably better off doing it in Photoshop. So when I hit done, yeah, see, it didn't do that particularly great a job of it. So I'm going to go back to my history and click on back to where we were, and we'll just put that back. So yes, you can get rid of stuff. If you just have like one stray can sitting on the ground, yeah, you can get rid of that. So one other thing that's new in Lightroom 4 that I missed this morning is the whole soft proofing process. So that's right here in the Develop module. If I click on this, I get a soft preview. Now it does it against paper white, and I know that's what paper you're going to be printing on, but I find it to be a little harsh transition from the gray I've been working on. If you control or right click on the white around it, you get a choice. I can make it anywhere from black to white in between. So if I go back to more than 80% gray, I find that a little easier on the eyes, maybe even a 50% gray. I like to proof there. Personal preference. Now what I really want to check is up top here, is I want to see, are there any colors that are not going to print? And if you look right here, I can turn this on and off. Actually, there aren't any. However, so what we've got here are two different buttons up here. One is the destination gamut warning, meaning can my printer print these colors? The other one is the monitor gamut warning. And you see that blue just turned up here? Let me zoom in on that a bit. Let's go to 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. That's showing me that those colors in that image are actually not even being displayed correctly on my monitor. They're beyond the gamut of my monitor. Now I'm just working on my laptop now, so that's an sRGB monitor. So what that's telling me is there are colors in this image that are way beyond sRGB. Now I can edit, but I have to understand that I'm not seeing those colors correctly. Now conversely, while we're zoomed in, let's see if there are any. Yes, there are. There are colors that are going to change when print. You notice, let me zoom in 1 to 1. See around the neon? See right here? If I turn this off, you can see that's telling me those colors are going to change. Two choices. Well, I can either live with it because I know they're going to change. They're going to lose some saturation, and that's what we're seeing right now. We're getting to see that these colors have diminished a bit. Can you control it? To a degree, I could go in and manually desaturate those colors or change the hue of them a little bit. Let's see if that works. So there's my highlight warning on. Let me come back down to use saturation luminance. I can try the saturation. I'm going to go with hue. See if I just, by changing the shade of this particular neon a little bit, will it make it go away? And I was actually going down makes it worse. You can actually see it growing. Going up isn't doing a whole lot better either. So hue wasn't the answer. Let's, excuse me, let's go to, hold on, I undid one too many times. Let's try saturation, and we can bring it down with saturation. And if I drag the saturation down, you can see the red starting to go away, but it kind of desaturates a lot of the image. So the answer to that is no. Just leave it be. It's a warning that those colors are going to shift when they're printed, but there's really, in this case, there's really nothing we can do with it. As no surprise, we're dealing with a neon sign. You got to expect that certain papers just aren't, they're not going to be able to handle that. But I am looking at this through a proof preview, notice that. And this may change depending on the paper you choose. In fact, it may change on the rendering intent. Let's take a look at relative colorimetric versus perceptual. Not seeing a big change there. Let's try a different paper. Let's see what happens if we go to premium glossy. Do we see a difference? So let's see. Yeah, actually, premium glossy seemed to actually have lost even a little bit more color. So we go perceptual, relative. Not seeing a big change there, but do notice that when we use the gallery pearl, we got some more color back. I'm not sure how well you guys have seen it in the broadcast, but some of the color around here came back. This gallery pearl paper is an extremely high gamut paper, so it really does a nice job. Okay, so let's zoom out of here. So again, we're looking at our proof preview, but we're kind of done. We can't make these colors print. In fact, let's hit the Y. We can see kind of our before and after. And it's not too bad. You can see through the restaurant sign, the restaurant wording here, you can see it's lost a little bit of saturation, but there's nothing you can do. There's no way to print that neon color on those particular papers with my inkjet. If I send this out to a lab, different world. But when you're printing it yourself, you just have to understand that your camera can capture colors that your printer just can't print. And these neon colors are a good example of that. So in some cases, the proof preview will give you a good result. You'll actually get to change some things. In some cases, not. Now, if we go to perceptual, let me just see. Take a look right here. Look right at the sky just to the left of the bird, and watch when I click to relative. On relative, it lightens up a little bit. So you get to decide which kind of rendering do you like. Do you like the perceptual or relative? In this case, what that's telling me is that I've got a fair amount of color you can see I've got a fair amount of color that's out of my monitor gamut and out of my printer gamut. When that happens, perceptual is generally a better rendering intent. Relative is good if you have just a very little bit, a couple of pixels out, but when you start getting as much as we just saw, probably perceptual is the way to go. And if I'm ready to print, I can just go to the print module and print this using these settings. I've got my paper profile. I decided for this particular image, I like the perceptual rendering. It kept a denser result up in the sky, and that's going to give me what I want. The last thing I could do from printing while I'm here is, obviously I didn't size this for my paper, so I don't want to fill. I'll just leave it that way. You can stroke a border and things like that. You can add grids, you can add multiple copies of it, you can do lots of stuff. This is a subject for another day. But what I do want to do is on my output, I'm going to print to, now am I going to print to my printer? Or when it says print to a JPEG file, what it will do is actually take this image with all the information and export a JPEG so that you could then send that off to your lab if you didn't want to go through the export way. Since I'm dealing with a raw file, it does support 16-bit output, and it did remember what settings I chose because this was a proof preview. It chose my paper, it chose my rendering intent, And this is what's going to come out of my printer on this particular paper. That's really how that works. And I see, oh man, I'm out of time again. All right, so let's finish up. Wow, that was a lot. And I could have gone for hours more. Oh, the soft proof, somebody asked, Jack asked, how do you display the soft proof checkbox? It's in the develop module. When you create a soft proof, it creates another copy. If I go back to my original file, which was right there, in the develop module, let me turn off my preview. If you go into the develop module in Lightroom 4, you will just see in the bottom left here this button called soft proof. And you can just click that on and off. And you can see it's quite a difference. There's a lot of extra color in here, particularly on those neon signs. It's going to move. Just as a warning, neon's a color. It's going to be difficult to print on an inkjet printer. So here's an image. This is String Lake in the Grand Tetons. And that's Grand Teton right there. And I probably didn't meter this one, or I did something wrong. So because the exposure is kind of off. So let's take a look at the histogram. And we can see, yeah, it's kind of missing over on the right-hand side. So let's go through this process first. So again, I'm going to push the whole exposure over a little bit just to open things up. Then, again, I'm going to use the Alt key and click on white and move that over until I just start to see some of the, you can see I get some of the snow on top of one of the peaks, just so that just almost gets there, and then I'm going to back off a smidge. And then the same thing for the black slider. That one already has got some. Just going to bring that over so it just starts to disappear. Fine. Now, my shadows are still kind of dark in here, so let's bring those up. Let's bring up the shadows a bit. And we already did blacks. Highlights, I don't know if I want to push those up a little bit. Let's see. I actually might want to bring them down. Okay, so we're on our way. Now, the presence section, the clarity slider. Let's watch and see what the clarity slider does to this. See how it's just really starting to separate out the details of the image? And again, what clarity is doing is it's increasing localized contrast. And vibrance. Again, remember, vibrance is going to affect the cooler colors or the less saturated colors. So I'm going to add a lot of that. And then I'm going to bring up the overall saturation in the image a little bit. All right, it's starting to look better already. So again, all right, we're done with this panel for now. Let's again work our way down. Luminance. I want to bring this, actually I want to bring the saturation of the sky, make that blue a little bit deeper. And I'm going to do the same thing in here. Increase this color in this foreground here. All right. What else do I want to do here? Well, we can check our detail. In fact, this one, since it was a little underexposed, is going to have a little bit of noise. Now, in previous versions of Lightroom, you had to be at 100% to see any sharpening. Lightroom 4, you do not have to, but it certainly makes it easier to see the sharpening. Let me bring up my panel. I want to take a look at the top of the peak here. And you can see we've got some noise here, but I want to sharpen and apply noise reduction at the same time. So I'm going to add sharpening that I like to use for landscapes. Again, I'm going after fine details, so I'm going to bring the radius slider down. Again, I'll hold in the Alt Option key. I'll check my slider to see. And I'm going to want to be somewhere in the middle. And then for masking, again, I have the Alt key in, and let's limit the sharpening to those areas with the highest contrast. Now you can see we've got a little bit of noise in here. In fact, let's zoom in at 2:1, and you can see it's a little bit of grunginess. So let's add noise reduction. And you can see right then and there, see how it disappears? So again, this is why I would not want to do this to an image that doesn't need it, because it is going to soften detail in the shadows, but it does a nice job of getting rid of the noise both on the peak and in the sky. Sky in particular. Watch what happens again if I turn this off right here. Look how much noise was actually in that sky, in the original. And look what that noise reduction has done to the image. It's really an amazing difference. Come on, catch up. There we go. Now again, detail. In the detail slider for noise, you get just basically a grayscale of the image. And also color noise. As soon as you turn on noise reduction, you get a default setting for color noise with this 2550. In most cases, I generally actually find that works pretty well, so I usually leave it alone. So let me go back off. So we've added our noise reduction, and let's check lens corrections as long as we're here. We'll do the profile. I'll enable the profile, and it sees that this was my Canon 24-70 again. And again, you can see that little kind of edge straightening. You didn't notice it until you actually fixed it. Then you see, okay, now it's straightened it out. And my camera calibration, I should have done that earlier. This was Jackson Hole Sunrise. And, oh, did you just see that? Watch the sky here. This is one of the beauties of having a custom profile. So here's the standard color, and you see it plays it safe, but watch what happens when I dial in the profile I created at this location, and watch the colors kind of jump. The sky blue got a little bit darker, and then the greens in here changed, because again, remember, I found my 70 is a little overly magenta, and this really just puts everything back. It's very cool. Okay, so moving on. What are we going to do now? We've got all our basics done. Now it's time to go to the fun stuff up on the top. And this is where we're going to use some of the more targeted tools. In fact, I'm going to use the adjustment brush, which is, to me, probably the most powerful tool in Lightroom. And there's a lot of hidden stuff in here that people are not comfortable with. So let's say I wanted to just change the contrast and the clarity and the density of the sky by itself. How do I limit that? So what I do is scroll down first, and there's an option here called Auto Mask. So I'm going to click that on. I'm going to bring my feathering down a little bit and keep my flow fairly high right there. And then I'm going to turn on the mask overlay, which is right here. And if you're going to find yourself doing this a lot, you're going to find hitting the O key on your keyboard does the same thing. And I can adjust my brush size either in those sliders or with the left and right bracket keys. And as I click and start to draw, you'll see, in this case, I have my overlay set for red. It's going to start to paint. It's not actually painting, it's showing me the mask in red. Now notice, even though my brush is going over stuff other than the sky, it's only adding the stuff where that plus crosshair actually touches. So let's come on up here. I'm just going to click in here, get these little spots. It probably would have made sense for me to actually zoom in to do that, but you can kind of get the idea. And we're looking pretty good. By the way, if for some reason you don't like red, you can go up to Tools and Adjustment Brush Overlay and change it to another color. Red's fine with me. I am going to zoom in at 1 to 2, 50%, because I want to clean up where it picked a little bit. See, it got a little bit of red in there. I don't want that, so again, our friend the Alt Option key turns the brush into a minus. So now if I paint on here, it will just deselect that area. And I can let that catch up, move this over a little bit, just to see where else it picked up. And again, Alt to change it to minus, and get rid of this stuff. And you can be as careful or sloppy as you want with this stuff, because since we're doing contrast adjustments, it's not going to affect, you're not going to notice it all that much. Now I can also clean up. You can see I have some little spots that I missed, so I can just go in and add to those. So let's zoom back out and we get to see our overlay. So that I can see the adjustments I'm making, I'm just going to hit the O key again, or I can turn off the overlay. But it is still active because we haven't said done yet. So now if I want to bring the exposure of this, just the sky down a little bit, I can darken that. I can increase the contrast a lot, start to bring those clouds out a little more. That was a little too much. I can increase the highlights, make the whites whiter. I can add clarity to just the clouds to give them some more separation. And I can adjust the saturation. Sharpening is not something I would typically do to clouds. Generally, you want those to be soft. You can also even add a color overlay to that. If you wanted to tint them, you could do that. I'm not going to do that in this case, but that's, you just click on this just so you see what it does. If for some reason you wanted magenta clouds, you can do that, and it's pretty hideous, but it's there. It's there if you want it. Let's turn that off. Now, if you're dealing with clothing, by the way, and I'm going to be doing some portrait editing work, webinars in the end of August, that's where something like moire would come in. And that's not something you're typically going to run into in a landscape photo. All right, so let's hit done on this, and let's take a look and see where we are. So I'm going to hit the Y key and hide my menus, and look how dramatic a difference we've got so far with what we're doing. But there's more, so let's bring that back. Hit the Y again to turn that off. And I'm going to move this off to the side again to give us some more real estate. I want to add some even more to this. I want to add some more focus to the image and some more oomph to it. So let's go back to basics. I'm going to increase the overall contrast of the entire image by sliding this over after I've done some of those edits. I like that. Now I'm going to use the brush again, and I'm going to start to kind of paint in the image a little bit. What I want to do is I want to take a little of the I want to take a little of the saturation off up here. I am going to use the auto mask because I don't want it to go into the sky. So I'm just going to start painting. Oop, I forgot to turn my overlay on, and you can do that at any time, by the way. I'll just hit my O, and you get to see where it is that you selected. I just thought that was getting a little bit too extra yellow for me. So I'll hit O again to hide that, turn down the saturation a little bit, and it will just affect that area. Now, something that is new in Lightroom 4 is the ability to change the color temperature of the area you're painting with. So without leaving the brush, I'm going to hit New, turn my overlay on again, and it seems that these trees kind of here in the middle are maybe a little bit too yellow. I'd like them to be a little more bluey-greeny. So I'm going to put my sliders all the way up. I'm going to do 100% flow, and my overlay is turned on, and this time I'm going to turn off the auto mask because I just kind of want it to go everywhere that I paint. I can be a little bit sloppy with this because this is going to be kind of a subtle adjustment. Yeah, and you see that's everything that we've just selected with the mask. So again, O to hide the mask. And now this time what I'm going to do is come to the temperature up here, and I'm going to make it a little cooler, which is how I would kind of see these trees. And actually, let me go all the way over just so you can see what happens. I wouldn't want to do it that, but you can see it's really made them crazy blue. I just want to cool them down a little bit. And let's let that catch up. And we can see the difference there. So one more place I'm going to work. I'm going to give myself a little bit smaller brush. I'm going to click on New. And I'm going to turn the mask on again. Click on Auto Mask. And in this case, I just want to come over to the top of this peak, since that's kind of one of the focal points. Let me turn my mask back on again. And kind of pick that area. I want to increase the local contrast just of Grand Teton there, just to kind of give it a little more power. And hold down Alt to deselect a little bit of the sky that I picked up. All right, so turn off the mask overlay. And then I'm going to go back into my sliders, and I'm going to change the contrast just on the peak. I'm going to bring the exposure down a little bit. You know, there's a little bit of haze out. When you get something off in the distance, it does lose its contrast. And I'm going to increase the clarity just of the peak. And I'm going to hit done. And the last thing I'm going to do for this image as I look at it, I think I'm going to increase the overall saturation just a smidge. And all right, so on my monitor now, that is looking stunning. So very cool. Now, one interesting thing, a couple of you asking questions about the masks. One thing, really cool thing in Lightroom is the history. And the beauty of the history in a Lightroom file is that it stays with the file. Even if you quit this, you can come back in and go through the history panel. This will actually stay with the file. You can see all the things. Look at all the things we just did to this particular image. So that was a lot of stuff. So one last time, let's hit Y and see where we were before and after. And get rid of the menus, and let's turn the lights off, and you can see it's pretty dramatic change for an image that really was somewhat underexposed. So let's go back and let's do another one. Let's pick a different location. Somebody complained that I was hanging out in Jackson Hole too much, which is one of my favorite spots. Let's go, well, we were in upstate New York. Oh, let's do something completely different. Let's choose a vertical. Okay. Now that you can see, this is a little bit after sunset. This is actually the Unisphere. This is in Flushing Meadow Park in New York, and you might recognize it if you saw the movie Men in Black. It's the thing that the spaceship crashed through as it was flying over Shea Stadium. In fact, this is just actually down the walkaways from that. There's the spaceships from Men in Black. So again, we've got an image. It's actually correctly exposed, but again, the saturation, the tonal curve, and remember that your camera doesn't have the tonal curve that your eyes have. Your camera can capture about 6 stops maybe total, about 2.5 up and 3 down from your middle exposure range, where your eyes can see many, many times that, and it's constantly recalculating. Your eye also has a different tonal curve than your camera does. So that's why you perceive color differently, and sometimes when you're doing landscape stuff, it just doesn't have what you saw. So again, I'm going to kind of pseudo HDR this. I'm going to increase the highlights. I'm going to open up the shadows a bit. I'm going to increase the whites, and I'm actually going to add to the blacks. Again, I'm going to kind of pseudo HDR this, and I add a lot of presence. And just look what that presence slider did. Look how much contrast it adds to the image and how much detail it brings out. Vibrance, again, a lot, because it's going to increase the cool colors and a little overall saturation. And this is getting closer to what it looked like. It really was a very dramatic sunset that we kind of lost from the original image. And just that quickly, look what we've done. Let me hit the before and after. And that quickly, we've gone from the one on the left to the one on the right. And what else do I want to do this? I use my Use Saturation sliders again. I'm going to increase the saturation in the clouds a little bit, or the sky a little bit, and in the yellow in the clouds. We'll come down here and add a little more to that glow. And you can see the sliders going as I move this up and down. And one other thing, I don't really care about this stuff in the foreground that much, so I'm actually going to darken it out a bit. So I'm going to use the graduated filter right here, and I'm going to click at the bottom and drag it up. And how this thing works is, from the bottom it will be 100% of whatever adjustment you made to 50% to nothing. And you can see I get an angle thing here, so if I want to change the angle that it happens. If I want the transition to be more extreme, I can just drag the top arrow down and move the entire thing where I want it. I can click on this point, and now everything from here down will be 100%, and there'll be a very sharp transition. Not what I wanted for this particular image. So let me spread that out a little bit. I want a little more gradual transition. And what I want to do is just bring down the exposure of that foreground, just kind of to take your focus off of it. All right, same thing up here. I can do the same thing in the sky. Let me just do a graduated filter here. This time I want to kind of enhance these clouds a little more. So I'm actually going to drag over the globe a little bit, because remember, it's the order, the direction that you drag, so it goes from 100% to 50 to 0. So I want to increase the contrast just in the sky, and I'm going to add some more clarity to the sky. Look how it's really bringing out the clouds. Good. So let's be done with that. And I'm going to use my adjustment brush one more time. And I am going to turn on the auto mask, which it already is. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Let's go to 50%. Because what I'm after is to actually pick up some of the actual country things here on the globe. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to do this a little bit sloppily. Somebody asked, is this a good time to use a sketch tablet? And the answer to that is absolutely. Let's let's get some of the other areas here. Basically, all I'm going to do is I just want to lighten these up a little bit just so they have a little bit of glow on them. Yeah, I saw I picked up a little sky. I'll get rid of that in a second. Again, let's get North America here. And Alt to turn it into a minus so I can clear up my sky. And let's zoom out so I can see I got a little bit of this cloud right here. Alt minus, get rid of that. All right, so let's hide what we just selected. And what I want to do is just add a little exposure to that to kind of bring them out a little more. See how they're starting to come up? And yes, I did that sloppily. You can take your time and do it a little better. But again, that quickly. Let's look at our before and after. Lights out. Look at the difference. So I think what you're probably seeing is, wow, you can do a lot of editing in Lightroom that maybe in the past you left for Photoshop. Okay. So let's bring this back. And now someone asked, how does it that profile? So all right, now we've got our image. Let's output this. So we're going to go to the print module, which we go up here and let that catch up. All right, so I've got my image here ready to print. And let's get rid of all this page stuff. Let's just back everything off a second. So print to. We can print to a printer or to a JPEG file. What do we want to do with color management? What paper am I going to? Now again, this is a subject for another day, but you can see I have my profiles here. In fact, here's one I created for Ilford Gallery Pearl. So I can do that. If 16-bit output is supported from the file, which in this case it is because it's a raw file, by all means, take advantage of it. So if you got something that's really driving you nuts, then send me a note. Send it to answers@X-Rite Photo, and I'll do my best to get you an answer as soon as possible. So until then, hope to see you guys online again soon, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.